Now, especially at this time of the year, coming toward the end of the year, we are reflecting on the last 12 months, but also looking for in terms of what should we do in terms of career progression? How do we best prepare for the year to come? And that certainly changes when we are progressing in a career and getting into the senior executive suite. Now, today we are joined by somebody who has been specializing, sorry, I said again. Today, we are joined by somebody who is specialized in the senior executive recruitment and career progression space. Richard Triggs is here from Aretha Recruitment, and I'm really looking forward to talking to him all things career progression, the role that personal branding plays, and also what is the state of play when we're looking into the job market. Richard, thanks so much for being here.
It's fantastic to be here, Petra. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I've had to listen to quite a few of your podcasts, and you cover some very interesting topics. So I hope I'm up for the challenge.
Oh, you certainly are. And likewise, I've been following you for a while. Just before we pressed play, I said, I feel like I've known you forever, but we actually haven't met yet, even though we are literally neighbors. We live both in sunny Brisbane. But you've been in the recruitment space for 20 years, 15 years in the senior executive space. I'm curious, what got you into that space? Is it this story just landed there by accident, like most of us?
Oh, look, I think the vast majority of recruiters fall into the career. They don't grow up thinking, oh, when I'm an adult, I want to be a recruiter. Most of the time we want to be a spaceman or a doctor or whatever. For me, it was, I had grand aspirations to be a rock star. I went to high school and I played guitar and sang in bands. And when I finished high school, I toured as a musician for 4 years and had lots of fun. Ended up in Melbourne, hoping to get a record deal, which fell through. And so I rang my parents up. I think I was about 22 at the time, and said, oh, please let me come home and go back to uni. So I came back, did a marketing HR degree, worked in the building services industry, in sales and then in operational management roles. And then in my early 30s, went back to university to do an executive MBA. And while I was doing the MBA, like most people doing an MBA, started to think about, what do I want to be when I grow up? And I went to see a recruiter that I'd been a client of, and they said to me, oh, have you ever thought about working in recruitment? And so lo and behold, that's how I started in recruiting. So I worked for 1 year for what was at the time the biggest recruitment company in the world, which is a company called, then called TMP Worldwide, now called Hudson. And then after a year, I went and worked for a company called Davidson Recruitment, which was the biggest privately owned recruitment company in Queensland. My last 18 months there, I sat on their board and I managed half of that business. And then I exited, and not long after that started my business, which is called Arete Executive. It's a word that a lot of people find a bit hard to pronounce at first, which is excellent because it allows me to tell a little story. So arete is a Greek word. It means the fulfillment of one's full potential. And Homer, who wrote these books called the Iliad and the Odyssey, used it in the context of where heroes gather to realize their full potential. So we picked that name, Arete Executive, and almost 15 years later, here we still are. We started on the 1st of February 2009, right in the middle of the GFC. And I tell you what, it's been an interesting ride since then. We've had GFC, and we've had mining industry collapse, and we've had COVID, and we've had wars, and we've had recessions, and goodness gracious, it'd be nice to just have 1 year where everybody said, you know what, this year, everything's just going to be fine. Let's just have a nice, relaxing year.
Good luck with that. Well, what a story. Thanks for sharing. And also thanks so much for clarifying where the name actually comes from. And I love your reasoning for it, because that certainly encompasses what recruitment and career development and progression is all about. Now, clearly, you've been through a lot, from the GFC to the mining crisis to global pandemics, just to name a couple. Over the last few years, especially, what changes have you seen in the recruitment space? Because you've been in the heydays and you've been in the challenging days, let's just put it that way.
Oh, look, I think, well, obviously, one of the massive changes to the recruitment industry has been LinkedIn. So if you think about certainly pre-LinkedIn and in particular, LinkedIn recruiter licenses, there were a lot of recruiters who made a lot of money from showcasing talent or essentially floating candidates to their employers of choice. So I used to specialize in recruiting in the property development industry. And so if somebody walked in and they were, very experienced and they had a great CV, and for whatever reason, it was time for them to find a new job, we would say, look, here are some employers that we could represent you to. Would you like us to do that? And then we would go to the employer and say, look, we've got this candidate, Fred. Do you want to meet him? If you meet him and you like him and you hire him, you're going to have to pay us a big fee. And employers would have to do that because they didn't have direct access to talent. Then what happened was, everybody started to get their own LinkedIn profile, and LinkedIn started to realize that there was obviously a lot of money to be made through using this as a recruitment resource, and they started to sell LinkedIn recruiter licenses. So that meant that organizations would say, rather than paying, let's say, $60,000 or $80,000 potentially for one placement, why don't we hire an internal recruiter who we can pay probably about that amount of money, and they can do all of our recruitment for an entire year. And so that idea of floating talent, now you would say to an employer, do you want to meet this person? If you meet them and you like them, you're going to pay me a lot of money. The employer will probably say, well, look, I don't need them right now. And if I did need them, I would just go and find them myself. So why would I want to feel obliged to pay you, Mr. or Mrs. Recruiter, a lot of money when I can just go and get them for free? And that had a radical impact on the recruitment industry. And there are a lot of recruiters who really found that incredibly challenging to deal with. I remember going to a recruitment conference many years ago, and we were very friendly with the people who run LinkedIn in Australia. In fact, I wrote a book, Uncover the Hidden Job Market, and a lot of that is about using LinkedIn to find jobs. And recruiters were literally coming up and verbally abusing the LinkedIn people, for ruining our industry. So that's been a substantive change. And then I think the other thing that's also happened is particularly senior executives are becoming much more conscious now about their personal brand. So they're realizing that if they want to be attractive to future employers, or even potentially future employees, suppliers, contractors, customers, etc., they need to invest in being more than just good at their job. So that's changing a lot of the dynamic in terms of recruitment. And then the final point, I suppose, is that there are recruitment companies who are still trying to work very traditionally. And then there are other companies like ourselves who are offering new innovative solutions, which are proving to be very attractive to the market. So my competitors in the executive search field, particularly the big global players, are typically charging upwards of 25 to even 40% of salary package, whereas we offer solutions for example, a headhunted shortlist solution for 7.5% of package. So as younger people are moving up, they're starting to really question the traditional value of recruitment and say, why should we be paying such a huge amount of money when there are other more affordable and more innovative solutions in the market? Yeah, so lots of change, and yet at the end of the day, still it's the same. Employers want to hire top talent want to find excellent jobs. So fundamentally, the way that we recruit now, in terms of the basis of the work, has not changed at all in the 20 plus years that I've been doing it.
I'm so glad that you took us on the path of how recruitment has changed, because I don't think many actually know that LinkedIn, when you introduced the recruiter license, that it has totally changed the game. And you have been through the very beginning to now, and also adapted your style, how you actually do business, which is one of the reasons why you're still in business and one of the front leaders and the trust authority in your space. Now, besides the reduced fee, what other differentiators have you identified are your competitive advantage to all the traditional search firms?
When I first came into recruitment, I was in my sort of mid 30s. I was just finishing an executive MBA. I'd come from essentially a COO role. So I was for a new recruiter, I was a fairly mature business person as compared to most of my peers. And when I came in, I recognized probably at least within the first 3 months, if I wanted to be better than 9 out of 10 recruiters, I only had to do one thing: return people's phone calls. And it amazes me even now, almost every day, talking to both employers and employees about how frustrated they get that recruiters don't even have the common courtesy of replying to their emails or returning their phone calls. So there's a lot of talk in the recruitment industry about today's candidate being tomorrow's client. But there's very few people who actually follow through with that. They play it lip service, but then they do their typical poor habits of treating candidates like a commodity. So I think one of the big differentiators for Arete Executive is we've always put a lot of attention on the candidate. So, for example, in 2015, I wrote a book called Uncover the Hidden Job Market, which I've sold or given away over 10,000 copies of that book. A new edition of that's just come out recently. We give that to every candidate that applies for a job. I run a monthly webinar called Ask Me Anything, where people can come on and ask me questions about their job search. I run a variety of networking events aimed at really bringing community together and really helping candidates to connect with their employers of choice to get what I call those hidden job market opportunities. So yes, we've got some innovative solutions in terms of how we deliver our recruitment, but fundamentally, I think the critical thing is just being of great service. I've always said that as long as I'm happy and helpful, the universe will look after me. So really my intention is just to be that happy and helpful. And it's amazing how many of our employer clients are as a result of me assisting those people whilst they've been going through their job search.
Mm. And whilst everyone talks about how many changes there are constantly and the consumer behavior is changing and they're expecting more, in the end it still comes down to the fundamentals. Are you respecting me? Can I trust you? Are you responsive? Like, things never change. We're just using different tools, and if we can't even pick up the phone or return an email, which is a basic, there's no surprise why so many come and go. Let's put it that way. Especially in the recruitment space, it's a bit of a cowboy market because you can make a lot of money. It's a fun job, but it's also if you want to have a long-lasting career, it requires a lot more than just chasing and having a one-trick pony approach.
Well, if you look at our industry as compared to any other professional services, so lawyer, accountant, engineer, etc., in recruitment, there's no qualification, there's no accreditation, there's a very low barrier to entry. Anybody can print a business card saying they're a recruiter and start work. A lot of the larger recruitment agencies typically employ young people with limited training. And so as a result, the industry is full of a lot of people. I mean, I say I wouldn't trust 98% of recruiters to walk my dog. Right now, it's not to say that there aren't great recruiters out there. There are some excellent ones, but when we've got an industry that's so poorly regulated, so poorly trained, it's no wonder that it has a bad reputation.
Absolutely, which is why we've got people like yourself who are raising the bar of what actually good looks like in the industry, and hopefully that sets a good differentiator to everyone else in that space. Now, speaking of changes, clearly the last couple of years have been full with redundancies and hiring freezes and all the uncertainties what's going on in the market. People are concerned, especially in Australia, if we are in a recession, if we're heading into a recession. New research says that we've got a 1 in 3 chance that we are getting into a recession in 2024. So everyone is about worried what's next. Where are you seeing the changes, especially heading into the new year? And what does 2023 kind of show already that we can expect?
Well, I suppose if I go back and look at my history of, as I said earlier, we started during the GFC. And at the time, it's like, oh my God, the sky is falling. We've got this GFC, mass redundancies. less than 6 months later, employers are saying, oh my God, there's no talent. Where are the people? We have to hire the people. And then the same thing happened in the mining industry. Obviously, Queensland, very mining dependent state. Around 2012, 2013, suddenly the mining industry is in crisis, mass redundancies. And then less than 6 months later, where are all the people? And then in COVID, again, Australia's very fortunate in that we were able to lock down quickly and be relatively safe because we're an island a long way away from anywhere. I don't think it was to do with any good government policy or, I think we're just fortunate because of geography. But once again, beginning of COVID, oh my God, the sky's falling, mass redundancies. And then a few months later, where are all the people? And less than 2 years later, this whole concept of the Great Resignation, right? So I've become very skeptical about the doomsayers. Even in a poor market, good people are needed. In fact, employers need good people in a tough market more than in a good market. So I don't think really there needs to be any fear about it at all. We're constantly going through this cyclic nature, which is largely fed by, the media who, want to attain clicks or views or whatever. So they are emphasizing what is wrong rather than what is right. I mean, recently, I don't know how recently it was, definitely within the last year, I saw a report on the news and there was an interview with the CEO of the Australian Small Business Association or something like that. And they said, oh, how's everything going? He said, oh, the market's fantastic. And, business is doing really well and everybody's really optimistic. And, we're excited about good times ahead. And the journalist said something like, oh, so you're really worried about being able to hire staff then, are you? It was like immediately disregarding all of the positivity, to focus on something negative. So we are as busy as we've ever been. October was our best month in 15 years. We are feeling very optimistic about next year. We've just appointed 2 new people to our recruitment team. Obviously, I'm a small business, but certainly talking with my peers in the recruitment industry, everybody seems to be quite optimistic. So I'm not sure. I think if you are good at your job and you put your attention on achieving great outcomes for your employer, you'll be fine.
To be honest, couldn't agree more, because we've seen the peaks and troughs and the bear and the bull markets over the last hundreds of years. Like it's nothing new, but everyone in the second there's one little tiny negative news or update, everyone focuses on that. And probably also media programs us, because there's a saying, what bleeds leads. So of course we're focusing on the recession and the redundancies and the job losses and AI, and everyone takes my job out than me just doing my best that I can. And this is also what sets you apart, again, just doing the very best and control what you can control. Now, having said that, you said before that especially senior executives realize that just being good at a job isn't necessarily enough anymore, especially when you get into the C-suite or the board roles, and they're focusing more on their personal brand. Can you elaborate a little bit more as to what is the reason for the change and the focus, and how do you see that they are focusing more on actually building more of a reputation than just a resume?
Okay, so my book, Uncover the Hidden Job Market, is based on the premise that, in my opinion, at least 80% of the best jobs never get advertised. They never get to recruiters. They never get to the open job market. They're filled through the hidden job market. What does the hidden job market mean? It means that an employer sees somebody who can solve their problems and take away their pain, and they hire them whether there's a vacancy there or not. So as a senior executive, if you're limiting your job search to purely talking to recruiters and applying for jobs on Seek, then you're missing out on the vast bulk of opportunities. What you want to do is you want to get in front of your employer of choice before they know that they need you. in order to build those relationships so that when the vacancy becomes available, you are logical first choice. If it's 80% for executive roles, I'd say it would be 95% for board roles. In the board scenario, it's fairly easy to put somebody on a board. It's pretty hard to get them off. So as a result of that, boards are quite conservative about who they appoint. They want people that they know and trust, that they can work well with as a board. So what I see a lot is senior executives who will come to me and they'll say, oh, you know what, Richard, I've been so busy in my job, head down, bum up, achieving the goals for my boss, that I've put no attention on building my networks. Suddenly now I'm in a situation, either through my choice, I'm looking for a job, or a redundancy termination situation. And I've realized that all of that time I should have been investing in building my brand and building my networks. I haven't done it. So there are some obvious things that people should do. Number one, you should have an excellent LinkedIn profile. Your LinkedIn profile should be as good, if not better, than your CV. It's what I call your zero moment of truth. So people are looking at your LinkedIn profile before they're meeting you, and not just employers and recruiters, but also prospective employees, suppliers, customers, joint venture parties, strategic alliance. Everybody's looking at your LinkedIn profile. So before I came onto this podcast, what's the first thing I did? I looked at your LinkedIn profile, Petra, right? So you want your LinkedIn profile to really sell you as being awesome.
And what's the verdict? I'm awesome.
Oh, of course.
Most importantly.
Absolutely. But you'd be amazed. You'd be amazed how many people's LinkedIn profiles are terrible. And especially if you look from an employer point of view, I'm just finalizing a book that I'm writing. I actually hope to have it finished by this Sunday, which is my first book's aimed at the employee, how to find a job. My second book is aimed at the employer, how to hire and retain, top talent. And if you were to go and look at the LinkedIn profiles of the leadership team of the ASX top 10 companies, either they don't have a LinkedIn profile or their LinkedIn profile is absolutely rubbish. And yet these are the same companies who are saying people are our best assets and who are wanting to hire top performers. And yet somebody would look at their LinkedIn profile and say, why would I come and work for you? There's nothing about your LinkedIn profile that attracts me to want to be in your team. And then, of course, there's a whole heap of other things. And again, LinkedIn has become an absolutely incredible platform for sharing articles, sharing blogs, being on podcasts. I mean, as you and I both know, podcasting is a relatively inexpensive and yet a fantastic way to build profile. Now, if you're an employee, a senior executive, you may not want to start your own podcast, but certainly you might want to see podcasts that you can be a guest on. You want to be out there shaking hands and kissing babies, taking time out of your diary, whether it's a weekly or on a monthly basis, to go and meet key people of influence in your industry and build that relationship with them for the future. So a big part of what I'm doing from an educational perspective is teaching people how to do this, because I know how critical it is for them to achieve their full potential in terms of their careers. And yet very, very few people are doing it at all, or if they are, doing it well.
In the last couple of minutes, you literally dropped a ton of gold nuggets that I want to unpack a little bit further, because you mentioned that our online presence is our digital footprint, and we are making up our mind whether we like somebody or not, whether we trust somebody or not, whether we get in touch with them or not, literally in the first few seconds. And if we don't see necessarily what we're looking for, we're clicking on the next person. But then at the same time, we are also determining what's our perception about this person. Is this person up to date? Are they a thought leader in that space? Are they leading in any kind of way in terms of content, in terms of community? There's so many ways to lead, and this is how we actually get opportunities, or people could think of us being a good fit for a certain role that may not be advertised or may never get advertised, but there's a perfect fit for it. And then the other thing that you mentioned is about a network. And this is one of the biggest issues that I also see, especially with middle managers, or they want to get into the C-suite or the more senior roles, but somehow constantly miss out. And it's often because they've built a network of peers rather than decision makers. Now, you mentioned already a couple of ideas in terms of how you can build your network. Obviously having a strong LinkedIn profile that attracts the right opportunities to you, but also podcasting, whether you are a guest or you have your own show. Have you got any other strategies, especially heading into the Christmas season, that we can leverage in terms of getting in front of those decision makers, or those who could open doors or could make introductions without being the sleazy and slimy salesperson knocking on doors and says, "Hey, I need a job. What can you do for me?"
Well, I suppose this is really the crux of what my book is about. So when I talk about networking, I'm not talking about going to a networking event and walking the room and saying, okay, my goal is I have to get 20 new business cards, or all that kind of stuff that we used to do. What I'm talking about is actually getting directly in front of your employer of choice. And whether that is because you're actively looking for a job now, or whether it's because you're wanting to build a relationship for future opportunities, again, LinkedIn is a fantastic tool. So let's say, for example, I'm a senior finance executive in the mining industry, and I want to build relationships with the CFOs of other mining companies in my space. Well, the great thing now is I can look at a company's website, and if they're a listed company, they're quite likely to have their leadership team on their website. If not, it's still quite easy to find their senior leadership team on LinkedIn. And then I can reach out directly to the CFO, and I can say, let's call CFO Mary. Hi, Mary, we've not met before. I'm a senior finance executive in the mining industry, and I'd really love the opportunity to have a 15-minute Zoom or Teams meeting with you to introduce myself. I really respect what you're doing at Rio Tinto, and I'd love to get to know you. Now, of course, the person who's receiving that message is not an idiot. So they will know that part of your motivation is because you're potentially looking for a job. They then look at your LinkedIn profile, and because your LinkedIn profile is awesome, and because it clearly articulates your key achievements and transferable skills, they want to meet you. They want to meet you because part of their role is to build a bench of talent for the future. Now, historically, when I wrote my first book in 2015, I'd say, ask them for a coffee. Well, people don't do coffees anymore. A coffee requires really probably a 2-hour commitment. I used to do 10 coffee meetings a week. Now I do 10 Teams meetings a day, right? So all of this new technology has made this so much easier. As well as that, the person that you're talking to on Teams, they may not even be in Australia. But because we have, this is one of the blessings of COVID, that people are now much more amenable to having a Zoom or a Teams-based relationship. So again, as that senior finance person who's perhaps thinking, okay, in 2024, it's probably time for me to step into a new role. The opportunity now at Christmas time is to start to consistently and proactively reach out to those people and get in front of them. Now, if you can do that, in terms of my book and the way that I coach people through this process, I say, if you reach out to 3 potential employers of choice a day, which is 15 a week, that should result in a minimum of 2 to 3 meetings a week. If you have 2 to 3 meetings a week, I pretty much guarantee you within 12 weeks, you'll have a new job. In fact, it often happens far more quickly than that. And yet at least 98% of people who read my book never implement. They go, oh, Richard, it's so fantastic. I completely get where you're coming from. I need to reach out to my employers of choice. And then 3 months later, they ring me up and go, oh, Richard, what jobs have you got? And I say, how are you going reaching out to your employers of choice? And they say, I'm not doing it. Because they're either too egotistical, or they're too scared of rejection, or they're too lazy. But
Absolutely.
Christmas is a fantastic time to do it because people are starting to wind down. They've perhaps got a bit more capacity. They're starting to think about, their human capital needs for next year. They're starting to think, oh, I've got that new project that I'm going to need to find the right team for, or Bill in the team is retiring next year. I need to start to think about, what am I going to do to replace Bill? So it's a beautiful time to be out there building these networks of key decision makers and also key people of influence, people who are actively in the market talking, so that they might catch up with their friend and their friend says, oh, our CFO just resigned, and they say, oh, I met this person 2 weeks ago, they're amazing, do you want an introduction?
Absolutely. And in the end, it is a bit of a numbers game also, as we know from a recruitment space. The more people you talk to, the more opportunities open up. And I always say you build the roof before it rains. And I'd rather have 3, 4, 5 opportunities on the table than none, than having to chase my tail when something hits the fan.
Completely. But I mean, even if you're not looking for a job, what a fantastic opportunity to go and meet some really interesting people, to build some relationships, that could be useful for you for a whole variety of ways other than just finding a new job.
Absolutely. Now,
Mm.
when we talk about finding a job or getting any kind of opportunities, marketing material is important. You mentioned our LinkedIn profile already. Is there anything else to consider? And what role does the resume play in 2024 and beyond?
Look, I think a resume is still a very important piece of, the way that you present, particularly for jobs that are being advertised in the open market. There's still very much a requirement that you will submit a CV. So once again, you want a CV that clearly articulates why you're awesome. I talk about it in the book. You need to sell the sizzle, not the steak. So a lot of CVs I see, they've got a lot of steak in them. So somebody say, oh, I was in this job and I did these things, and before that I was in this job and I did these things. But, what did you achieve that you're most proud of, that you'd hang your hat on, you'd say, this is why I'm excellent at my job? For most senior executives, it's things like, I grew revenue by X%. I improved profitability by Y. I launched a new product into a market and achieved 23% market share. I reduced lost time injuries by whatever. So make these key achievements quantified and sexy. You want an employer or a recruiter to think, I have to talk to Petra because look at these amazing things that she's done as they're articulated on your CV. So it's very much, it's not a duplication of your LinkedIn profile, but in many respects, your CV and your LinkedIn profile are quite similar. Yeah. So there's still very much a strong requirement for CVs. Now, one of the things I get asked a lot by senior people is, oh, with all this AI and this, this technology that goes through my CV and picks out keywords and so on, how do I make my CV AI friendly, or how do I make sure that I'm not being overlooked because I haven't got the right words in my CV? And quite frankly, I think a lot of that's rubbish. Especially if you're applying for a senior level job, you will have a human being read your CV. If a company doesn't have that, then they're potentially missing out on excellent talent. Because what if a candidate is fantastic, but they're not fantastic at writing their CV? So you have a computer that discounts them because they forgot to put the right keywords in. Well, that's just dumb. So I don't think particularly, maybe if you're a graduate IT person, you need to have all the right IT jargon, which I'm not an IT person, so I don't know. But at a more senior level, I wouldn't be concerned about that.
Well, opening the Pandora's box and speaking of skills and in the age of AI, especially and keywords, what are the skills that you would recommend, especially the mid to senior level professionals look into in 2024? Like, obviously, we need to stay up to date with what's happening in AI, but do you think traditional education, especially going back to uni, having an MBA or doing a PhD, is the right choice? Or do you see there's a change in how we actually stay up to date?
I did an executive MBA back in 2002, and after I did it, I was constantly being asked by the MBA schools to go back and talk to the students about how to find a job. And in fact, I went and did a presentation to QUT maybe 2 months or so ago to their MBA students about how to get a job. And I can honestly say in 20 years of recruitment, I've probably been asked to prioritize candidates with an MBA definitely less than 10 times in 20 years, if not 5 times. Now, I have an MBA, so I'm not diminishing the value of an MBA. But in Australia, in the US, as a mid-level leader, it's pretty much taken for granted you'll have an MBA. In Australia, we are much more interested in real experience rather than qualifications. Likewise, I would say at an executive level, a PhD, if anything, is probably a detractor rather than positive. Because if somebody's got a PhD, there might be a stigma, oh, they're just an academic, or, do they have any real world experience? So I would say if you are intending to go back to university, you are far better to put your attention on your core role. So, for example, if you're in finance, you might go back and do a Master's of Finance. Or if you're in HR, a Master's in HR, rather than an MBA. An MBA was traditionally designed, somebody's an engineer, they get promoted to being a manager of engineers, they don't have any business experience. So they do a little bit of strategy and a bit of finance and a bit of marketing and a bit of HR, and in order to just get some base level knowledge. Well, if you're already at a mid-level leadership role, you've already got that. So in my opinion, as much as the MBA schools hate me saying this, I think it's a waste of money. I think it's very important to remain aware of what's happening in business. Now, one of the easiest ways to do that is to listen to podcasts. There's a huge amount of knowledge and so many different podcasts across so many different topics, but doing that kind of education and reading is very, very important. But what do we care about? We use a recruitment methodology called performance-based hiring. The best predictor of future performance is past performance. So if you can find somebody who's done it before, they've done it well, and they're motivated to do it again, they're much more likely to be successful. So again, at mid-level leadership and above, I don't really care about qualifications. I care about what have you actually achieved? What are you proud of? What gets you out of bed that you're excited about doing? And where's the evidence?
Thank you so much for your candor and for transparency. You're literally speaking one language, because I often see that senior level professionals go back to uni, getting their MBA, and think everyone is running that door in, just to realize, oh, actually nothing has changed other than having $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 in debt. And often it's also they try to fill a hole of not being able to market and sell themselves. And I always say, if you invest a little bit in your personal branding, in how to present yourself, in how to actually reach out and also face rejections, you're much better off than investing 3, 4, 5 years and thousands of dollars later in debt. So I really appreciate that you sharing your experience also. You mentioned your next book is coming out. Give us some more details on the release date. What's the book about? Where can we find it? And of course, where can we connect with you?
So the new book is will be published early in the new year. It's called Winning the War for Talent. It is aimed very much at employers as to both attract and retain high-performing teams. My experience, again, in working with lots and lots of employers is that many are not nearly as good at employing as they need to be. And often they are delegating their hiring to internal recruitment teams who are just not successful. So I feel almost an obligation to my industry to provide education to the employer. So that book will sort of complement my existing book. As I say, the first book's aimed at the employee, the second book at the employer. how can people find me? Well, obviously you can find me on LinkedIn, my business, Arate Executive. I have a podcast. It's called the Arate Podcast. I'm sure if you want to find me, if you type Richard Triggs into Google, you'll definitely find me. Look, I'm in a situation now. LinkedIn, you have a maximum number of connections of 30,000. And I've been sitting up around 30,000 for a few years now. So I actually have to cull connections in order to add new connections. So if people reach out to me, wanting to connect with me on LinkedIn, I may not connect dependent upon who they are, not because I don't think they're worthy, but because I just don't have capacity. But certainly, if anybody's interested in getting a copy of my book, Uncover the Hidden Job Market, you can either email me or go to my website. We give them away for free. We've got a bunch of other resources that we give away for free. Again, all in the, I suppose, from the perspective of being happy and helpful. If I can help people to get a great job, then hopefully when they get that job, they'll think kindly on me. And if they have a recruitment vacancy, they might ask me to fill it. So I'm just investing in my future karma.
Honestly, this has been such a refreshing and fascinating conversation. So really appreciate all your insights that you shared, and also how much you actually contribute to not just your industry, but overall the economy. So again, thank you so much for being here and everything that you do. I put all the links, of course, in the show notes, and spreading the good word to get the good karma out there.
Excellent, Petra. I really appreciated the opportunity, and have a fantastic afternoon.
Thank you, and you too.
Okay.